Solving root rot in pulse crops. I've had a number of pulse crop producers email us, call us, talk to us in person and just said, hey, we're having all these issues in our pulse crops. What can we do? We don't have quite as many options as you corn and soybean guys. And while I admit, yes, we don't raise pulse crops on our farm and we might have a few more options as corn and soybean farmers, you know what? A lot of the same things I'm going to tell you in pulse crops are exactly what we do to solve root rot issues in corn and soybeans.
Okay, first of all, what I look at is, do you have this root rot issue on every single acre? And if you do, okay, well then it might be a variety selection issue. But more times than that, when I ask that question, a guy says, well, no, I have it in the valleys, or I just have it in this soil type, or I just have it in this area of one field. Let's evaluate what is different in those areas. In many cases, it comes back to a drainage issue. And I bring that up to guys, wow, it's just in the low ground, huh? So water sits there longer. What's going on? Why don't we have good drainage? Do we have an issue with too much magnesium in the soil that really tightens the soil up? If that's the case, well, then we need to be applying calcium out there to loosen that soil up. Otherwise, if a farmer says, no, I've got a good ratio of calcium and magnesium out there, then we may need to install some subsurface drainage tile to improve the amount of oxygen that's in that soil.
Another thing you got to look at is just flat out compaction problems. We find very often people will till at the same depth year after year after year after year, and we go out to the field and you stick a rod down and bam, you hit a hard pan, and that's where everything stops. You've got to break up those compaction layers. You've got to get down below those compaction layers and allow some of the things to flush through that soil, especially water that's getting held up there. So early in the season, when you're going to plant into cooler, wetter soils, it's not going to be quite as cool and it's not going to be quite as wet if you've got drain tile, if you've got good levels of calcium, and if you've reduced your compaction.
You know, when we talk about the micronutrients, as we do frequently on the show, there are several of them that are really known as important for disease prevention. Things like copper and manganese. I would suggest taking a good soil sample in these areas where you've got some root rot issues and looking at exactly what you've got for a balance. Many times we see things like take-all in wheat. If we get our copper levels up, we don't seem to have much for take-all. But in pulse crops, you know, what is that specific micronutrient that's going to make the big difference? Without looking at your soil test, I can't tell you exactly what we're off, but it's important to get those micros up to spec.
Well, it's not just micros, it's every single nutrient we've got out there. We typically see these root rot issues in heavy soils. So we want lower magnesium, higher calcium, but then we want to have good levels of phosphorus, really good levels of potassium, sulfur, all the micronutrients. And in a lot of cases, your crop is going to be a lot more tolerant to root rot or any disease out there if you've got the right fertility in your soil.
What I like so far, Brian, is none of these are chemical control methods that we're talking about. We're talking about nutrients that are available to anyone, whether it's organic production or conventional production. Getting that nutrient balance is going to be helpful for any crop that you want to raise out there.
All right, another thing you can certainly do, depending on the pulse crop you're raising and what's labeled in your area, is going to be a seed treatment. There are lots of good seed treatments out there. Many different fungicides are being used and combinations of fungicides being used. So use a good seed treatment that's really going to help get your plant off to a good start. Also, I would say use an insecticidal seed treatment in addition to the fungicide. You want some protection from insects too, because anytime a bug feeds on a plant, it opens it up for disease. You're going to find more disease in your crop when you have bug problems.
A couple other things that can help you with root rot are doing some tillage. If you can do tillage in your area, burying residue from previous crops, if you had a disease issue, can definitely help. That's what the old timers always would do because that was their only option at the time, other than crop rotation. So let's say you're raising pulse crops, you really like the market for pulse crops in your area, but you've got a root rot issue. You can rotate away from pulse crops for 3 years, planting other crops that are not susceptible to those diseases, and you can get away from that disease cycle and reduce your pressure greatly.
I'm going to come back to, we were talking about soil fertility, but I forgot to mention soil pH. Soil pH is incredibly important. Ideally, we want that soil pH range for most crops in the 6.3 to 7.3 range, even 6.3 to 6.8 for a lot of crops that we talk about. So get your soil pH down if you've got high soil pH, or lime if you've got a low soil pH. And again, this comes back to doing good soil testing and finding out what you've got in the field to begin with. Another thing I guess I would say is buy good quality seed And then finally, control your weeds and your other diseases out in the field. You're just going to end up with overall a better stand, a healthier crop, and a crop that's more tolerant to not only root rot, but any disease out there. Once again, root rot doesn't have to destroy your yield in pulse crops. We gave you a number of different tips today, so hopefully if you follow through with those, root rot will be much less of an issue going into 2016.
Well, one other issue that you may have out in your fields is weed control. We'll show you how to stop our weed of the week coming up later in the show.